Perfecto. En honor al tiempo, hola a todos y a todas las asistentes. Mi nombre es María Jesús Inen y a nombre de la Facultad de la Psicología quiero darles la bienvenida a nuestro tercer día del primer encuentro internacional de habilidades socioemocionales, el desarrollo y la colaboración en un mundo hiperconectado. Hoy les presentamos el seminario Contexto familiar como primeros modeladores de las habilidades socioemocionales. Les pedimos por favor que los invitamos a participar de esta actividad realizando sus preguntas a lo largo de ella en la sección de preguntas y respuestas que se encuentra en su barra inferior de Zoom. Les pedimos que el chat lo usen principalmente solamente para problemas técnicos o que nos vayan contando desde dónde se van conectando a nuestra actividad. Les comento que esta actividad será traducida. En su barra inferior de Zoom encontrarán un icono de mundo. Ahí ustedes al seleccionar sobre él podrán elegir el idioma con el que desean escuchar la actividad. Igualmente a continuación les dejaré en el chat un texto con las instrucciones de cómo activar la traducción simultánea. Finalmente comentar que esta actividad está siendo transmitida a través de nuestro canal de streaming de la universidad, uddtv.udd.cl, y que durante los próximos días también enviaremos los links para acceder a las grabaciones. Sin embargo, estas ya están disponibles, las de los días anteriores también, en socioemocional.udd.cl. Les pedimos que tengan consideración con la tecnología y que nos acompañen en las conexiones hoy, y si tienen algún problema técnico nos van avisando. Agradecemos a los más de 500 inscritos interesados en participar de nuestras actividades y los invitamos a informarse a través de nuestra página web de psicología.udd.cl o a través de nuestras redes sociales @psicologiaudd. Y también les comentamos que nos etiqueten en nuestro encuentro con el hashtag encuentro HSEUDD para que también los vamos siguiendo en las redes sociales. Dejo a continuación con ustedes a Daniela Aldoney, directora del Laboratorio de Familia, Adolescencia e Infancia, y es profesora investigadora del Centro de Apego y Regulación Emocional de la Facultad de Psicología, quien presentará a nuestra expositora de hoy. Gracias, Daniela.
Hola, buenos días a todos. Gracias, Jesús. Es un gran honor para mí poder introducir hoy día a la doctora Natasha Cabrera. Ella es profesora del Departamento de Desarrollo Humano y Metodología Cuantitativa de la Universidad de Maryland. Ella imparte cursos en pre- y posgrado sobre desarrollo socioemocional, parentalidad, desarrollo infantil y pobreza. Es directora del Family Involvement Lab, donde dirige investigaciones que incluyen las relaciones entre padres e hijos, poniendo especial importancia a cómo los padres, además de las madres, influyen en el desarrollo de los niños. Estudia también el desarrollo social y emocional en niños de distintos tipos de familias y grupos culturales y étnicos. También estudia los predictores de la crianza adaptativa y desadaptativa y trata de informar, o en realidad informa las políticas públicas a través de evidencia empírica en estos temas. Así que sin más introducción, dejo con ustedes a Natasha Cabrera y a disfrutar de este ¿cómo se llama? Comentario hoy día que nos va a entregar. Gracias, Natasha. Welcome.
Thank you. Muchas gracias. Should I share my screen now? Yes. Good morning, everyone. Buenos dias, and thank you so much to Daniela for the lovely invitation. Let me start with an apology. I am sorry that I will not be doing this presentation in Spanish, but one day, I keep saying that, the day is going to come. It's not going to be today, but it's going to come. So thanks again for inviting me to this really great opportunity to share my work. Today, I'm going to give you a kind of broad stroke of social development, in particular focus on the family. The title of my talk is Maternal and Paternal Contributions to the Development of Social Skills in the Early Years. Okay, so let's start with a quick definition. What is social development? We tend to think that early mental health, or also early social emotional wellness, is developing a capacity to, from birth to 3, to experience, regulate, and express emotions, to form close and secure interpersonal relationships, explore the environment, and learn all in the context of family, community, and cultural expectations of young children. In essence, social development is really the process of learning to relate to other people. There are some key, after decades and decades of research, we have key or central cores of development. And let me go through those quickly. First of all is nature and nurture. They both combine to define who we are as individuals. Babies are thankfully wired. They are born to connect with other people. They learn to discriminate sounds of language very early in development. They recognize their parents' voices. They can match emotional voice tone to emotional faces and expressions. They prefer looking at faces. So they really are wired to interact and socially connect to other people. Temperament is a big, important component of this process. Excuse me. We seem to think that parent temperament is biologically based. It's fairly constant over time, and it really affects a child's reactions to other people and the environment. So let me talk a little bit now of family as a context for social development, where all this magic occurs. One statement that is undisputable is that each baby is born into a unique family that has its own culture and history, its own strengths, and its own ways of coping with stress and adversity. That is a legacy of the family that they bring to the baby. The family's culture is really one of the most influential aspects of growing up and developing social skills, as it influences all areas of a baby's development, including the social and emotional realm. The baby's communication of emotions and needs establishes the learning pathways in the brain that lead to all other physical, cognitive, and emotional learning. It is within families, then, that children learn to experience and communicate emotion to others and to themselves. Families, then, have the most continuous and emotionally charged relationship with the child. Infants and toddlers learn what people expect of them and what they can expect of other people through these early, rich, consistent, and supportive experiences with parents and each other, and as well as other folks in their family. But I want to make a distinction between an interaction and a relationship. Relationships are different. Relationships have emotional connections. They endure over time, have special meaning between two people, and create memories and expectations in the minds of the people involved. These are different to capture and research, but I want to give you I want to show you a little clip of a video that kind of begins to show you how these relationships begin to form in early childhood.
Okay, Mommy, that again? Yeah. 1, 2, 3, jumping in the stairs. Mommy, okay? Huh? Mommy, okay? Mommy. Yeah. Oh. You coming in? Good. Oh, thank you. Come here. May I have a big hug, please?
I hope they enjoy that. There is, I love that video. It's a real joy between them. She's enjoying her dad is enjoying her. There's connection, there's hugging, there's warmth, there's love. We try to capture that in research to understand how fathers and children develop these bonds early on, and then how that has an impact on how children develop as they get older. All right, so just to recap, this early social emotional wellness really develops between the context of relationships then, not just interactions. In these first relationships, we think between children and their caregivers are really the foundation for what comes later. And that's another concept, a core concept of development. But what comes early needs to be present because it is the foundation for what comes later. So when you have a shaky foundation, children don't develop the skills that they need as they get older. So caregivers help babies express emotion, develop emotional regulation, and form these really important close relationships. these relationships, there's a whole variation in the quality of these relationships. When these relationships are positive, nurturing, supportive, they can develop children the confidence that they need from themselves, to trust relationships with other people, with peers, with teachers, and to have a positive outlook in life. The support in the social emotional wellness of children within their families, we need to be aware of our own emotional history. So parents bring what I always or sometimes call emotional baggage to these relationships. We need to be aware of that if we are going to help the child develop positive, healthy, and nurturing relationships as they get older. Many factors affect the social emotional development. Not every family has the luxury to have an easy path. Sometimes we have developmental delays or serious health issues with the baby. There are lots of environmental risk factors, poverty, substance abuse, adult mental health issues, domestic violence, work schedules, lack of support, and violence either at home or in the community. And all these factors tend to combine in some adverse ways to impact the relationship of between children and the parents. We do have some guidance from theories about what are the ingredients and the process of these relationships within the family. We appeal to family systems theory. This is a scheme of really the connection between children, the community, the mom, the dad, the siblings, in other cultural contexts. Religious organizations, social events, schools, work, and of course, extended family. Families then are really influential in social development, and we study them for that purpose. But I want to pause here for a second to say something about what a family is. Much of the research that we have at our disposal was based on the assumption that family was one mom, one dad, and one child, or maybe two in North America. However, what we don't know is that families come in different shapes, sizes, and forms. And today, the contemporary view of family is much different from it was when this research was done. So I want to acknowledge that children's families can be of any type. And we don't always acknowledge in our research, but a family is much more broader than just a biological mom or dad. Is really the people who love the child, the people who think this child is the best thing that ever happened to them, the caregivers who are crazy in love with the child and who form a unit that creates support and encourage the child's growth and development over time. Families, we, from a theoretical perspective, then are like a system, like a biological system. All the parts are interdependent. For example, if you were to take out the heart, your body will notice. Same thing with families. The families form a unit, and when one part is missing or one part is absent, then the whole system suffers. Families, parents, then, and children influence one another in transactional, reciprocal ways. Parents influence the children directly, and then children influence the parents. So this transactional relationship is really what we try to capture in our research methods and empirical evidence. We also know that families serve multiple functions in the family. We need, for survival, they need to feed the child, provide shelter, and constant support. They also need, they serve an economic function. They help the child develop the human capital skills they need for children to grow up and be members of society. And of course, they are socialized, they're socialized children. Parental socialization takes many forms. They are direct instruction. You do this, you need to sit down at the table. You need to do your homework. Pretty much explicit instructions on how to behave. There's also a lot of indirect socialization through routines, through day-to-day activities, through modeling, through feedback loops. Children learn to know what's right, to know to do what's correct or incorrect. Also, parents are socializers. They provide and control opportunities to manage children's behaviors and to adapt and abide by social scripts so they can begin to be members of that cultural group. In terms of what aspects of parenting we study, we look at quality of this interaction and relationships and control tactics, what parents use, what types of control strategies parents use to modify the behavior of the child and to shape it according to the rules and norms of that particular cultural group. Okay, so how do low-income parents support their children's social development? Up to now, I gave you an overview of really what is social development, the role of the family, and how this process becomes almost like magic, creates these opportunities for children to develop social skills and become socially adjusted members of society. I think that's the goal of any society, anywhere in the world. We want people to be part of the group, to obey the rules, to be a productive member of society. What we know less about is the context of poverty and how that creates opportunities for children to develop the social skills. Poverty is a risk factor. In fact, it's one of the most important risk factors of why children have a difficult time developing the skills that they need, the earliest skills that they need to become, to develop later skills and then to become successful members of society. But in the work that I've been doing for the last 20 years, I've been focusing on what aspects of low-income families provide this growth and really rich relationships for children to develop social skills, even in the context of poverty. So I'm going to show you some studies that we've done in our lab that are focusing on this topic, specifically with low-income dads and moms. And you will see a lot of slides on a lot of information on dads. It's because it's on purpose. Most of the social development information and research we have, for the most part, included mainly mothers. And for the last 20 years in my lab and other people throughout the world really have been beginning to focus more on what dads bring to the table and how dads and moms contribute to their to the children's social development. So I'm going to focus mainly on dads, but most of the studies have include mothers as well. Okay, so this is just a quick graph to show you that one of the myths that we encountered when we started doing this work is that children, parents, specifically fathers, are really not very sensitive to the children's needs, that fathers are the ones who do their own thing, they say things that kids don't understand. And so the first study that we did, we really wanted to see, is that true? So this is a low-income sample of about 200 families. And what we found is, as you see on this tape, on this graph, is that moms and dads really pretty much relate the same way to the toddlers. So these are children about 24 months. The orange bar, sorry, my picture, I can't see it. It's mom, and the gray bar is dad. So you can see that dads are just as supportive, that dads are provided cognitive stimulation to the children in similar ways as moms, and that they are intrusive or negative, that is, they take away, or their activities during interactions with children do not allow them to have much autonomy. That kind of, we call that intrusiveness. Negative parenting is pretty much similar in both parents, and negative regard is very low, thankfully, on both. So for the most part, moms and dads with young children, they are the same, very similar in how they interact with the babies. Sorry, okay. Okay, so this is, again, just a quick diagram to show you the relationship between parent-child relationships. So this is the parenting and how that kind of trickles down to create these developmental outcomes. One important pathway is through the other parent relationship. So parent-father, mother, parent-child relationship has an impact on the relationship with the other parent, and that influences children's outcomes. Another pathway is really indirectly through the children themselves. So that's a work that I'm going to show you next. Okay, so we found, so this again is a study of about 50 moms and dads. And the study is small in scale because we collect observational data on both moms and dads. We go to people's homes, and the video that I showed you earlier, We spend about 2 hours in people's homes. We videotape the interactions, we take it to the lab, and then we code. And so this graph shows you that father sensitivity at 9 months is really related to children's cognitive skills. Fathers who are sensitive and engaged with the children have toddlers who have are able to communicate with dad, are responsive to dad, they use referential language, they have higher language scores, and they have also communicative diversity, which means they use lots of different types of words. Cognitive skills and language skills are particularly important in social development because having vocabulary, having the words to express yourself allows you better to tell your partner, your parent, your sibling how you're feeling and how you are and how you're behaving or how you are regulating your emotions. So cognitive skills are really important for the development of social development. We did this study, with infants and their babies, and one of the key elements of how this relationship begins to develop in early childhood is this idea or this construct called serve and return. Serve and return is really the process by which a child tries to reach out to a parent, tries to communicate, and the parent returns, much like in a tennis game, you serve and the other person returns. We think that the beginning of those relationships is right in the serve and return. The degree to which the child attempts to communicate, or a baby communicates to a parent by making a sound or reaching out or a gesture, and then what does a parent do in terms of responding to that serve. The parents who are more sensitive to that serve are the parents who are more likely to have the serve and return interactions that later predict language. For this to work, though, for the serve and return to work, the input from the parent to the child has to be contiguous, pretty much between 2 seconds after the baby has reached out, has said a word or a gesture. So if a baby is going blah, 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 and the dad goes, wow, what are you saying? Do you want this? That is a contiguous response. And then, of course, it's contingent on meaningful. If the parent says, oh, do you want your ball? Then you have given that child information about the world, but also you're connecting with that baby and trying to make that joint attention. We are both looking at this ball. We are both connected. So we're just beginning this work, but with my student Tina Chen, and we have some preliminary results to show you. You can see here, for example, on the left side, that the child verbal serves are not that many. These are babies at 9 months, so they are not doing a lot of verbal Googling sounds to the mom and dad, but they are actually doing a lot of reaching out, nonverbal serves. You can see, if you see my bars, that pretty much mom and dad are very similar in the way they respond to the baby's nonverbal serves. So the good thing is that babies and parents are serving and returning. The bad news, or not bad news, but not great news, is that the babies are not doing a lot of verbal serves these low-income babies, compared to other studies that have looked at the same type of coding with middle-class babies. We find that middle-class babies do a lot more verbal sounds. So the parents are responding more to verbal sounds. However, in our sample, babies are not doing a lot of verbal serves. So the parents are not returning those verbal serves, but they are returning the nonverbal gestures. This is just to show you that contingency and contiguous activity that we're showing here early. So the majority of the verbal responses were returned within the 2 5-second window time that we think is important to develop this serve and return interaction. So that's a good news. Half of the verbal serves were returned within 2 seconds by moms and dads. So again, the baby's attempt to communicate is being responded by parents quite quickly. Although most of the nonverbal serves were returned within the 2 seconds, however, they were not meaningful. So that is a potential cause for concern, is that when the child is gesturing, the parents are returning that the response quickly, but it's not very meaningful. And by that I mean, if the baby is trying to point to a ball, and the parent might respond, but might say, "Oh, we're going to the store now." So that has nothing to do with the ball, so that there's a lost opportunity for the child to hear the word ball referring to the object, and to connect in that way. So now the child and the parent they don't have joint attention to the same object. So that seems to be perhaps a source of concern. We do know preliminary just correlations that dad's returns to those child vocalizations are really correlated with language, with the language scores at 12 months. So the servant returns are really critical. And there's even with this preliminary work and all the work that people have done with the brain and, these early experiences are really critical. We want to focus more on this targeted interventions for parents to say, when the baby is trying to reach out for you, it really is a great opportunity for you to return and to create this, the beginning of this really rich relationships. Oops. Sorry. I'm sorry, I had, my slides were a little, okay. Sorry about that. Okay, so another context that's important for social development is reading, just engaging in some fun interactions with your child. We think that in addition to helping parents, helping children to learn words and language, that reading creates a particular intimate context to develop his social skills. We have looked at this data encoded for language, but also I wanted to show you this today because with large studies we have shown that this reading interactions with children are learning to, where parents are using things like elaborating on a particular picture that they're reading, or they're prompting for language, or they're labeling objects, that time that children spend together with the parents in this really fun, enjoyable interaction, it really is related not just to language scores, but also to the way how they regulate their emotions and sit still for 2 minutes, read with me, and develop this connection to parents. This is just a quick graph to show you the parents' use of elaborations. Oh, that is a ball. The ball is in the playground. At 9 months was significantly related to children's language skills. And we know that children's language skills are particularly important to understand emotional expressions of behavior and regulation and monitoring and discipline. And so language skills are really important for that purpose. Let me just show you. We also have done studies particularly looking at self-regulation and how parents and child, again, this relationship quality is related to ability to regulate their behaviors. We looked at play because play is a really fun and developmentally appropriate context between parents and children. The majority of the work that we have on play has been done with moms a little bit, but mainly with peers and with children themselves, understanding the nature of play and all these other things. We wanted to see how fathers, as playmates, what is their role in teaching children to regulate themselves? There's a whole rich line of research showing that fathers who engage in rough and tumble play, for example, have children who are more regulated, because rough and tumble play, which is, everybody can do it, by the way, moms too, but fathers tend to prefer this mode of play. Doing these rough and play interactions, when the dad and the child is playing roughly, they're wrestling or they're throwing pillows at each other, that creates opportunities for the child to understand its limits and boundaries. Dad might say, stop, it hurts. What are you doing? It was fun, now it's not. And those are really important feedback to the child. So we did a study with low-income dads, and we showed that, of course, poor dads can also play, and they engage in pretend play as the children get older and are beginning to understand more the fun, and they have the cognitive skills to engage in pretend play. Fathers can be just as playful. For example, they can, eat a foot with the baby and try to, as you see in this picture, try to tickle him. It can be creative, it can be imaginative, funny, and curious, just as in the way that mothers can be. The quality of the play, it's important. Not every play is of high quality enough to be to have an impact on these outcomes that we're looking at. So when fathers are more imaginative and more creative at 24 months, children need to tend to have better skills, better language skills at pre-K, and also some regulatory skills that I didn't show you here. So that fathers who engage in creative, fun play, for example, you're playing with a bowl and you put it on your head and you go, look, it's a hat. Let's pretend it's a hat. And those type of interactions not only are teaching children about language skills, but also teaching children to regulate their emotions, to see the dad's having fun, to enjoy the expression of emotions in that interaction. And also we found that when two parents are highly engaged, when mom and dads are highly engaged in this playfulness and high quality play, children tend to do better. Okay. Discipline is very important. It's the other second dimension, as I mentioned earlier, of parenting. This is the things that we do. We love our children, we feed and support them, but we also have to monitor them. And we wanted to look at what does that early discipline look like in low-income children, and whether that is related to, in what ways is it related to the children's ability to regulate their behaviors. We looked at a study of fathers and children, again, 24 months, and we looked at compliance. The task was asking fathers to help the children put away the toys after a session of having fun time with toys. It's not always a favorite of children, as you can imagine. Once you get into, when we go to homes to collect this data, to people's homes, we bring a bag of nice toys, and the dad takes the toys out of the bag, and the child and the dad engage in play. And then after 10 minutes, dad has to say to the child, okay, let's put it away now. It was so much fun, but now we got to put it away. I know it sounds cruel because children's, especially if they like the toy, 10 minutes is not a long time to stop doing something that you like. So the idea is, how is dad going to help this child stop doing something that the child likes? So we code for regulatory language, such as stop that, it's time to move on. And or sometimes fathers may use a negotiating, well, if you put away this toy, we'll give you ice cream later. Or try to distract the child. There's a dad who sings a song. It makes everybody like a little army. Everybody puts the toys away, singing the song. So he has a way to help this child to comply. What we found is that the direct language, especially from dads, was more likely to develop compliance. When moms use compliance, it didn't really mean stop that. It meant I can do it, I can stay here 1 more minute, I can stay 2 more minutes. When dad said stop, kids understood that it really was stop, and they're more likely to do it. So dads using regulatory language such as stop that, we're moving on, is really important for help them to comply and to stop doing something that they like, and hopefully begin to regulate their behavior, their emotions, which is staying in an activity that they like, and switching to something else. This activity is really critical for a school success. Children have to be able to stop doing something that they like and to move on to the next task. So compliance among parents, fathers, and children seems to be really important. At 24 months, fathers use this regulatory language with boys more likely, and regulatory behavior with children who had poor language skills. So when I showed you early those, the graph and the data showing the children's learn language skills in the context of playfulness, is that language is really important, and parents and fathers seem to be aware that when the child's skills are not as developed language skills, and therefore they may have trouble understanding what you want them to do, the best thing is just to use what we call regulatory behavior, which is in sometimes just physical discipline. It sounds terrible, but basically what it is in this case is just taking the child and removing him from that situation. So you are done, helping him to physically to move away from that situation. And we found that fathers are more likely to use regulatory language for their boys to explain to them why they need to stop, but use regulatory behavior when boys and girls, when the children are not really understanding their commands. And this type of strategy, we found it to be related to emotional regulation when the children were pre-K. Okay, so one more activity. This study, one more study. This study was interesting because we follow children and their parents at 9 months. And this is a low-income sample of children enrolling early Head Start. The majority of the sample was ethnically diverse, low-income African-American and Latino parents. What happened with the sample is that when we have a longitudinal sample and we're doing low-income research, you're more likely to have a lot of missing data, and it's very difficult to keep the data, the families, in this study. So in this study, for this study, we have information about father and children at 24 months, and then we have a lot of missing data about the father. So we don't know if the fathers were living in between these two times when the children were in 4th grade. We don't know if the fathers come back. So it's a kind of, it's not clear. But what we do know is that the fathers were living with the child when they were 24 months, and then the child has some connection to the dad in middle school. And what you can see here is that externalizing behaviors, the orange bar, and positive peer relationships in the black bar. And what we wanted to know is, we asked children in middle school how close they felt to the dad. Again, and we didn't know whether the dad was living at home or not. And the children told us, recorded that answers. I think the question was specifically if you were sad, or if you needed to go to an adult in your home, a parent, which parent would you go to? So the kids who chose dad, the kids who said, I'm really close to my dad, those kids were rated by the teacher as having fewer behavioral problems and more positive peer interactions than children who said, no, I'm not close to my dad. So it's a large sample, it's 500 children in this study. And even within the missing information about where the dad was living there or not, what these findings are interesting to me, because it seems to me that it's more of an evidence for the importance of creating these relationships and bonds early on. We know that the children were living with their parents when they were 24 months, and they kept some involvement with the parents. So the idea that even if it's not true that the father lives with you, the fact that the child believes and perceives that he's close to his dad seems to be a protective factor for social adaptation, especially middle school. And this data are really difficult to come by, especially longitudinal data with low-income families. So I find this study interesting, even though it's not, even though we have so much missing data. Okay, so this is going to be my last empirical study. So right now we're beginning to look more at how fathers help the children to regulate their emotions, especially in the early years when they are babies, 9 months and then 24 months. We have a longitudinal study of low-income families. And we are embarking in this process, in this study called to understand what strategies mothers and fathers use to socialize the children to not only understand and express emotions, but also to regulate them. So if a child is crying, does the father say, oh, you sound upset. Why are you upset? And trying to label the emotion as upset, link it to the crying, and then try to help the child to deal with and cope with that emotion. For example, if the father, we are looking at 2 specific type of strategies. Is the father or the mother supportive? Is it like, oh, I know you're sad. I would be sad too if I lost my ball, or if I couldn't go to the playground. So that would be a supportive strategy or emotion coaching. And a non-supportive response might be to say, oh, come on, stop it, it's not a big deal, or just ignoring the child's emotions. So we're just beginning to look at how mothers and fathers actually encouraging children to, or helping children to understand what they're feeling, how they're coping. This is really a long, a busy table, but just to give you an idea of the types of things that we're beginning to code on the father-child relationship, such as emotion coaching, which is, an example, hugging the child when they are sad, or you're sad because the toys had to go, minimizing the expression, minimizing the emotion. Might be, don't be a crybaby, you're getting mad over nothing, there's no need to cry, it's not that big of a deal. Other parents, other mothers and fathers use distraction techniques. Where's your favorite toy? Look at the birds outside. Grandmother just came. Or punishment, which is more negative. I'm not taking you to McDonald's if you keep yelling, or parenting spanking the child. And also just ignoring, the parent just ignores the child. So again, linking this back to the beginning of the talk and how children begin to understand emotions that are critical to develop these relationships, this type of parenting is really important to understand about how children begin to relate to other people and to understand that if they are sad, either they're going to be ignored or they are going to be helped to understand why they're feeling sad and how to cope with that. So this is really critical to the development of relationships. And we're just beginning to look at the data. So just a couple of maybe really preliminary findings is that fathers are using a lot more emotion coaching than moms for now. Emotion coaching are the more positive, hugging the child when they're sad. You're sad because your toys had to go than moms right now. But again, very preliminary. We don't really know how it's going to end. Okay, so let me just end with this. Children's social development is one of the most important tasks of early childhood. It really is one of the key, I think, tasks that children and parents have to do, because it really is a foundation for almost everything. It's a foundation for learning, it's a foundation for social skills, for relationship building, and to become successful members of society over time. Fathers and mothers and other caregivers play a really important role in helping children to develop the skills, emotional regulation, empathy, so you can have this positive, healthy, and nurturing relationships. The family context is key as well. It provides children those opportunities to develop the tools that you need to have these long-lasting relationships with themselves, with peers, with parents, and with other adults as they get older. And I think I'm going to say thank you so much for your attention.
I will give you the applause. Thank you so much, Natasha. Very interesting. And I really appreciate you sharing your data. And we have some minutes, so we can have some questions from the public or maybe from myself. And a las personas que están participando, perdón, pueden escribir sus preguntas y vemos cuáles podemos lograr contestar en el apartado de preguntas y respuestas y no en el chat para que podamos juntar todas. Las voy a decir en español, así Natasha las quieres escuchar traducidas o me entiendes.
Español está perfecto.
Ya. Una pregunta es sobre familias monoparentales, porque tú hablas mucho de la importancia de los padres, ¿verdad? Teniendo en cuenta que mencionas que la instrucción del papá podría ser entendida de una forma más directa o de manera diferente que la instrucción de la mamá, ¿qué sucede en familias donde solo hay una madre?
Okay. Can I translate what you asked me? So you're saying what happens in families when there's only one parent?
Yeah, in Chile it's more common to have only one mother. So what happened with what is missing, or what happened with the part of the father?
Yeah, that's a really. Is it okay if I respond in English?
Yeah, in English they will translate, no worries.
Yeah, that is a really important question. I think in single parent households, what happens to the child? Well, there's not a lot of research on what is especially in social development, because we're more focused on older children. We know, or we think that children who come from single parent homes are more likely to have difficulties as behavior problem, being socially adjusted. But what I would say is that there's a lot of variation as well in single families, and other adults. Fathers are not the only caregivers that can help the child to regulate their emotions and help them to become socially adjusted. There are other adults that are important: grandparents, teachers, other adults in the community, an uncle. Really development is, it takes a village to raise a child. It's true. In households where there's only one parent, for the most part, is being the mom. In the US is that as well, although we are seeing families where the father is more likely to be the single parent. However, in those families, there's more stress related to just doing everything for the one parent, having to do, instead of sharing your task with a partner, you have it all yourself. So that parent might be more stressed, might be less likely to provide those opportunities for the child. However, I have also seen research showing that when those single parent households, there's a really nice study with African American families, that when those single parent households that have access to an adult, be it mom's brother or family or grandfather, those children do get the emotional instruction or guidance that they need from other adults. So it's not fait accompli that if you're in a single parent household, you are not going to be social adjusted. It's just that there needs to be other parts of the system to come into play to help the child.
Yeah, and I think that, as you say, in African American families in the US and here also in low-income families, grandmothers play an important role in that.
Yes.
And some data is showing that they can help the mother to raise the child in a good way. They also ask if you know for any, or do you conduct studies with homosexual families or gay parents?
Yes, I love to do that. I love it, love it, love it. I have been, in my next life, I hope not. But yes, I mean, that is absolutely, I think as families become more diverse and divergent, I really go back to the dictum that we have in child development, that you just need somebody to be madly in love with the child. It doesn't have to be a different gender, it have to be same sex. It doesn't even have to be biologically related to you. But if you are in the home and you are biologically related and you are in a heterosexual relationship, then of course that's what I study. But that is not the only model of family. Anyone who provides love and care, sustained love and care and attention for this child, can help the child. So I have no doubt that in same-sex families that are guided by the same principles of love and affection and caring and support and patience, that those children are going to thrive just as well as they will thrive in the other families. But yes, that's my next study, I hope.
I hope we can do it together.
Yes.
They also ask about the role of the early childhood educator, like how they can help to improve some bonds or relationships when the child is not getting that maybe from home.
Yeah, that is really, really critical. I think Daniela and I, we just have a paper that came out a little while ago on child development, looking at these interactions between childcare and the home. And in that paper, we looked at literacy activities because it was really data-driven. The study did not have very good measures of the relationship between parents and the relationship between teachers and parents. But that's exactly right. We know that when the environment, so if you go back for a second, in the US, a child spends almost the entire day and equally in two places, the home and the childcare. And so we think that the interactions between those two environments are critical. We just haven't done much research showing how. But some of the early studies with childcare, the quality of childcare and how that matters for children, has shown that children who have very supportive, loving, positive relationships with the teachers or childcare providers at school, those experiences may buffer or protect the child against perhaps less optimal parent-child relationships at home. So the educators played a critical role in shaping that social adjustment of the child when the home might be a little short. But we don't really know exactly how they interact. But we know that
there's a lot of difference in the quality of the interactions in childcare.
Exactly. And, the parent-child relationship is just as critical to the child as a teacher-child relationship.
Mm-hmm. Another question here, they ask about co-parenting and how the studies that include fathers and mothers may help to understand the importance of the conceptualization of co-parenting.
Yeah, that's a really, really great question. I think I didn't include co-parenting as a variable, but I do have it in the studies that I presented. Co-parent is really important because it really, it tells us how the two parents are, whether they're on the same page about parenting practices, respond to the child, to a child's needs. And so we found it to be an important mediator of why parenting matters for children's development. Whether more parenting or better parenting, the parent-child interaction leads to more co-parenting, or the other way around, whether you are you are on the same page first with your partner, and that makes a good parent, it's a little bit up in the air, so the direction of that association it could be bidirectional. It could be that you are so invested in your child that because you are such a good parent, then you are willing to be more supportive of your partner. Or it could be that because you're supportive of your partner, it makes you a good parent. However, understanding that co-parenting relationship, especially in the context of single parenting, is really critical. We know from other studies that we've done with Daniela that co-parenting conflict, when two parents are not agreeing on how to, for example, if a child cries, should you let him cry and just learn to be strong, or should you attend to his needs every time that the child cries? When parents don't agree on what to do and they argue and they're undermining each other and they're not supporting each other, that type of conflict is actually more damaging to children's adjustment and behavior problems later on than relationship quality, than when the parents just don't like each other. Because, imagine if you are in a bus and the conductor is arguing with the other conductor and you're going, oh my God, this bus is going to derail and we're going to go, right? Because you want the people driving the bus to be on the same page, to have a peaceful, cooperation. And so children get very nervous when the fight is about them. So it makes it very insecure, and eventually you have more difficulties. So the co-parenting relationship is quite critical to focus on as interventions targeting parents and just parenting, actually. I'm not sure if I answered the question, but yes, it's important.
I think so. We have a lot of interesting questions, so I'm picking some because we can't answer all, but I think this is also interesting to ask about the change in caregivers, specifically in extended families. But I know you have some work on cohabiting families and how the change of the father figure in that case may affect child development.
Yes, that we actually, we've done a couple of studies. That's really interesting. So you have a scenario where child, there's a family and it changes, right? And the question is, that change usually is the father leaving, there's a separation or divorce, what happens to that family system, right? So if you see the family as a system, you know that if you take a part out, the whole system has to find a new equilibrium. And sometimes that is very difficult. So if the father leaves, and for example, if there's so much acrimony and aggression towards a parent that the father just does not see the child, that type of a situation will have a lot more negative effect on the child than if the father left the home but still got connected to the child. So the idea of mediating the separation of the absence is critical for children. If the father leaves and there's a new parental figure coming to the household, is sort of the same idea. We did a study where we looked at exactly that, and we wanted to see what happens. People call this shocks to the system, right? So that your life is going fine, and one day you go to the dinner table and you go, guess what? We're separating. That is a shock to the system. And we wanted to see whether the shocks to the system when the father leaves are particularly detrimental at different points in development. So if the father leaves when you are a 3-year-old, if the father leaves when you're 8 or when you're 15, when is the most problematic? And what we found was that the absence of that, when the father left, if the father leaves early in development between the first 5 years, it's much problematic for the child if there's a new father figure in the home that is not and they haven't really understood how to co-parent together. So the new father figure comes in, and the biological father is out, and the child is left with the mom saying, this is, you have to obey to this guy who's in here now, but dad is still involved. Like that creates a conflict to the child. Children who are older can manage to understand, I'm just going to close my door and I'm not going to talk to them because the adults are being crazy. But younger children don't have the coping skills to understand what's happening. Where is dad? Why is this guy in here? So that shock to the system tends to have more negative effects on younger children than older children. But there is a point, for example, if there's a point later in development that begins to be just as problematic for older children, between 8 and 13, I think it was. So when the child, at 8 years old, your social comparison between you and your other family, and between you and your friends' families is still not a big deal. But when you're 12 and you're 13, you kind of know that your family is weird or different, or something's happened to your family. When that happens, then children who experience this shock to the system by their father leaving the home, the child tends to have more behavioral problems, because now he goes to school and he sees that other kids and other families are together and his is not. It's different and it's strange. So the social comparison makes that child's experience of the father leaving a lot more difficult. But especially but for the group that we care about, these transitions can be done positively, but most of the time, because separation and divorce are not a pleasant thing, they cause a lot more, they have a lot more negative consequence for children when they're younger.
I think we're going for the last question. I'm going to try to merge some question in one. They ask about the socio-emotional development of children and how serious conflict in the family, even violence within the family, may affect that. And if there is an age range where where intervention will have a better effect.
That's a great question. There's really amazing work done by E.C. Cummings on this, on what happens to children when they witness domestic violence. And I encourage you to look at his work if you don't know it. What I take away from that work, and we've done a little bit of that, but because our children are younger, we haven't done much of that, is that domestic violence and witnessing domestic violence, it's very negative for children's understanding of this idea that I was presenting earlier about role modeling. If you watch and observe someone, if you observe that mommy gets hit every time she doesn't do something, you're beginning to, because children learn by observing, you're beginning to internalize some of those relationships, and you go, okay, well, next time I want something, I probably want to use that strategy. So from that perspective, is very upsetting. What E.C. Cummings finds that for some children, and this is back to the susceptibility hypothesis, some children can completely tune out a negative environment and do better than children who are much more susceptible to that environment. And one of the things he looks at is the children who are very reactive, and they get very upset, and they have a difficult time regulating their how they're feeling. Those children are going to have a much difficult time in situations where they can remove themselves from a conflict situation than children who are much more laissez-faire, and they cannot get reacted. They don't get as reactive to when they see something negative. But two things to remember: that temperament of the child is really important in moderating and mediating those negative relationships. There are some children who can just go to a corner and they hide and they read, and they can kind of try to ignore what's going on. And other children are going to be much more difficult to navigate those relationships. And again, the family system, it's key. If that violence happens, it's very difficult. It's much likely that it's affected the whole system. So mom is also acting in a different way and being more stressed out. So I know that we're out of time, so I'm running. But
yeah, sorry. Just to end, they're asking for the name of the researcher that you just cited.
E. Cummings.
Okay.
And I will send it to you, and that Danielle, I can send you an article by him.
Yeah, we can share it.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much. I really enjoy it. And we have a lot of questions. I'm sorry we can't go over all of them, but we hope we're going to have other opportunities in the future to share with you and know about your research. So thank you very much.
Thank you, thank you. It was great. I'm sorry I can't see everyone, but next time in real person.
Next time, hopefully.
Thank you.
Gracias, Natasha.
Gracias, Jaime. Thank you.
Nos vemos.
Nos vemos.
Muchas gracias, Natasha. Gracias, Daniela, por moderar las preguntas y gracias a todos los que se conectaron hoy día. Los invitamos a seguir participando de nuestras actividades de hoy y mañana y también a visitar la página web de socioemocional.udd.cl, donde están los videos y las inscripciones a las actividades que van quedando. Muchas gracias, Natasha.
Gracias, María Jesús. Y gracias a todos por escuchar.